Let's dive right into this explainer where we're unpacking something pretty fascinating: how the tobacco industry is actually forced to track the financial fallout of its own deceptive marketing. You know, when we look at corporate transparency, especially in heavily regulated sectors like this, getting to the raw data is absolutely paramount. So today, we're focusing on exactly how global standards force these massive companies to put a hard, quantifiable number on their legal missteps.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 4 key areas. First, the SASB tobacco standard. Second, public health metrics. Third, regulating marketing practices. And finally, tracking legal monetary losses.
Section 1, the SASB tobacco standard, and how we establish this entire framework.
Now, these standards carry immense global weight. They are currently under the stewardship of the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, within the IFRS Foundation. And basically, SASB requires entities to report sustainability-related risks that actually affect their cash flows over time. So this isn't just some niche reporting guideline, right? It's a globally recognized framework. For tobacco entities, which operate worldwide and face massive regulatory scrutiny, these standards literally dictate how they have to communicate material risks to their investors.
Moving right along to Section 2, public health metrics, and how we track a shifting industry.
It's really interesting to see how strictly these companies have to separate their sales data. Under the SASB framework, you've got combustible tobacco product sales volume, so think traditional cigarettes and cigars, tracked strictly under one specific metric. Then, distinctly separated from that, you have non-combustible products, and that includes traditional smokeless tobacco, non-tobacco nicotine products, heated tobacco devices, and even pharmaceutical nicotine replacement therapies. This split is absolutely essential because the regulatory and health risks differ wildly between a traditional cigarette and an electronic vapor device.
Tracking the gross revenue here actually acts like a financial lie detector. It shows investors exactly how much money these new alternative products are genuinely generating. Companies have to report gross revenue, and critically, revenue net of excise taxes from these non-tobacco nicotine and heated products. Plus, it's paired with a discussion metric asking companies to explain their process for assessing the risks and opportunities of these so-called harm reduction products. Like, are they actually capturing new market segments? What are the regulatory hurdles? This data forces companies to prove if their big pivot away from combustible tobacco is actually financially viable.
Section 3, regulating marketing practices. Essentially, how these products are sold.
So, international frameworks like the WHO FCTC exist for a very specific reason: to stop transparently deceptive advertising about tobacco's health risks. The SASB standards specifically require companies to describe their marketing policy and their positions regarding this global convention. The WHO FCTC has encouraged so many countries to introduce incredibly strict regulatory approaches, primarily to prevent early-age tobacco use through really clear, transparent warnings.
Think of Article 11 as the first line of defense. It ensures that the packaging itself cannot indirectly imply a product is somehow less harmful than others. Under this standard, companies have to disclose their stance on using misleading terms like low tar, light, or ultralight. It also dictates the strict design, size, and positioning of health warnings, including the mandatory use of pictorials, specific colors, and regularly rotating those warnings. Furthermore, it mandates the clear disclosure of relevant constituents and emissions right there on the packaging. The physical box is, effectively, highly regulated real estate. Then we have Article 13, which goes after the broader cultural footprint. It severely restricts how tobacco brands can sponsor events or stretch their branding into everyday life. This covers both direct and indirect advertising, so it curbs direct communication across TV, radio, print, billboards, and digital platforms, but it also aggressively targets indirect marketing. That means regulating promotional discounts, stopping the free distribution of products, and restricting what's called brand stretching, which is when you connect a tobacco brand name to a non-tobacco product. It even limits corporate-sponsored events and social responsibility programs. The whole goal is to entirely isolate the brand from everyday cultural promotion.
Which brings us to Section 4, tracking legal monetary losses via metric FB-TB-270a.1.
Whenever an investor or a compliance officer sees this specific code, they know exactly what they are looking at: the direct financial fallout of legal missteps. It is the quantifiable anchor of the entire marketing practices section.
Let's define this really clearly. This metric forces companies to put an exact price tag on the consequences of deceptive claims or misbranded labeling during the reporting period. Specifically, we're talking about the total amount of monetary losses resulting from legal proceedings associated with enforcing laws on health claims, unfair or deceptive claims, or misbranded labeling. If a company runs afoul of those WHO FCTC guidelines we just talked about and gets penalized, the resulting financial punishment lands right here. It takes a legal abstraction and turns it into hard, undeniable financial data.
And the net cast here is incredibly wide. It doesn't matter if the penalty comes from a government, a business, or an individual lawsuit. If it's a loss from a marketing violation, it gets tracked. The sources of these monetary losses include civil actions like massive class action settlements. They include regulatory proceedings resulting in penalties, disgorgement of profits, or restitution to victims. And they even encompass criminal actions. So whether the proceeding is before a court, a government regulator, or an independent arbitrator, if it involves a marketing or advertising practice, it counts towards this total.
Now here is a really crucial boundary that the standard draws. We are tracking the actual penalties paid to others, entirely excluding the company's internal legal defense bills. Included in the monetary losses are the actual fines, the legal settlements, the verdicts after a trial, and the disgorgements. But it explicitly excludes the legal fees and administrative expenses incurred by the entity defending itself. Why? Because investors need to see the true cost of the penalty for the actual bad behavior, right? Not simply how much the company is willing to pay its corporate lawyers to fight the charges. This completely isolates the exact financial punishment for the deceptive marketing itself.
But, just throwing a dollar amount out there isn't enough for true transparency. The standard actually demands a three-step narrative disclosure alongside the data. First, disclose the total monetary loss incurred from the legal proceeding. Second, describe the nature and context of the proceeding. Was it a settlement over a warning label violation or maybe a guilty plea over an advertising ban? And third, detail the specific corrective actions implemented in response to the finding.
Because, let's face it, the monetary loss itself is only half the story. Investors need to see these concrete corrective actions to know the systemic issue is actually being fixed. The standard notes that these corrective actions might include specific changes in everyday operations, shifts in management, new internal processes, physical product modifications, terminating problematic business partners, implementing new staff training, or even deploying new technology. The whole goal is to prove that the monetary loss catalyzed actual structural reform within the company to prevent future marketing violations.
And this brings up a massive point. Beyond the immediate financial sting, these legal battles fundamentally threaten a company's basic permission to exist in the marketplace. As the standard's topic summary powerfully notes, failing to effectively manage these issues impairs the industry's social license to operate. When a company routinely faces costly legal battles over deceptive marketing, it doesn't just lose money. It invites stricter, broader regulations that can choke off market access for good. So, effectively managing marketing practices preserves market share and decreases massive contingent liabilities.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. Consider how tracking these specific monetary losses changes the way we hold complex industries accountable on the global stage. When companies are forced to publicly put an undeniable price tag on their legal marketing missteps, does this ultimate transparency finally drive better corporate behavior? It's a vital question for investors, regulators, and frankly, anyone tracking global markets today. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the SASB framework. Keep questioning the data, and I'll see you in the next explainer.